Hi everybody, it's Clarke Camper with the September edition of Wall Street and Washington. Today I'd like to cover four things. First, I want to talk about why I think the conventional wisdom about the macro political environment in Washington is flat wrong. Second, I'd like to talk about what that means for the supercommittee's efforts to reduce the deficit. Third, I'd like to say a few things about our advocacy here at NYSE Euronext with the supercommittee to promote capital formation. And lastly, I'd like to say a few words about the time frame for implementation of Dodd-Frank rulemaking around derivatives. First, in terms of the macro political environment in Washington, the media narrative has been generally that Republicans lost, that Americans are disgusted with both parties, disgusted with Washington, but if they're really disgusted with anybody, it's Republicans. They thought that the tenor of the debate, the scope of the debate was terrible, and again, Republicans have lost. The narrative continues that here in the fall, we're going to see a Republican Party that returns chastened, looking for some kind of conciliation and some kind of deal around the supercommittee. The insider view is actually diametrically opposed to that, however, and that's why I say that I think the conventional wisdom is wrong. Insiders believe that fundamentally Republicans won, and both Republicans and Democrats in Washington feel that way. Republicans dictated the tone of the debate, they dictated the scope of the deal, dictated the timing, and they succeeded in keeping revenue raisers off the table, which was their number one priority. What does that mean for the supercommittee effort to meaningfully reduce the deficit this fall? Well, I think that what it really means is that the fundamental dynamics are not changed. In other words, you're going to see roughly a repeat of the movie that we just saw around the debt ceiling debate. I think it's going to start out a little more kinder and gentler, because I do think Republicans learned that they should try to be a little more civil in their debate. But I think fundamentally, as I say, you're going to see a repeat of what we saw with the debt ceiling. Republicans will tend to dictate the scope and tenor of the debate. We will run right up against the deadline of the supercommittee, and they're due to produce their deficit reduction recommendations just before Thanksgiving. I think it'll be a small bore proposal that won't really accomplish a lot and won't really please anyone. And finally, I think that the rhetoric will become increasingly heated as we get closer to that deadline. Now, I want to be clear. I hope that I'm wrong. I fervently hope I'm wrong, but this is how it looks to me from where we stand right now. So shifting into our advocacy efforts with the supercommittee here at NYSE Euronext, we have long been focused on efforts to promote capital formation, especially for smaller companies. Very specifically with the supercommittee, we are focused on trying to make it easier for smaller companies to go public. In particular, there is a bill that's moving through the House, sponsored by Congressman David Schweikert of Arizona, that is moving nicely through the House. We just earlier this week had a companion bill introduced by a bipartisan duo in the Senate by Senator Tester of Montana and Senator Toomey of Pennsylvania, a Democrat and Republican respectively. And that bill is largely the companion bill to the Schweikert bill, which means that we have a good shot at getting both chambers to agree on this proposal to make it easier for companies to go public. And again, we are advocating to try to have that included in the supercommittee recommendations this fall. Another piece of policy making that we're discussing in the context of the supercommittee is Sarbanes-Oxley relief for smaller companies. We've long advocated for there being a better balance between benefits and costs, particularly on smaller companies, and so we're looking at ways that we might be able to provide some relief from some of the most onerous provisions of Sarbanes-Oxley for smaller companies. Finally, a word about Dodd-Frank rulemaking, derivatives rulemaking, and the timing. Well, it gives me no pleasure to say this, but as I had predicted, the rulemaking time frame has further slipped. Just last week, we had a schedule released by the CFTC, and it now has most of the swaps, trading and clearing rules looking like they will be finalized at the earliest Q1 and implemented Q2. Again, that's earliest. As I say, it gives me no pleasure to say that, but as I've said all along, it's a very complicated, both political and substantive process. One thing that is adding a lot to the delay right now is the SEC's the challenge against the SEC and the successful challenge against the SEC's process and their proxy access rulemaking means that the CFTC and SEC are being extremely careful, as you would expect them to be, in making sure that their process is perfect with all these rules. So that is a large factor in why the rules have slipped on the derivatives side. But I will say that there's a lot more to that story, and what I want to do is leave it for now and say that we'll come back and talk further about that derivatives rulemaking time frame in the next Wall Street in Washington. Thanks very much. Take care.